Rwanda and the M23 realized that there is perhaps a gap or there's a window of opportunity to act in North Kivu with limited international scrutiny.
Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast for the foreign policy and global development communities and anyone who wants a deeper understanding of what is driving events in the world today. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg. I am a veteran international affairs journalist and the editor of UN Dispatch. Enjoy the show. On January 26, a Rwanda-backed militia known as M23 captured the city of Goma in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. This is a massive city of 2 million people and a major regional trading hub. While M23 had been active in the region for quite some time, this move marked a significant escalation in the ongoing conflict. To make matters worse, the group also vowed to march on Kinshasa, DRC's capital, and overthrow the government. So who are M23? Why is Rwanda backing them? What may come next in the conflict? And what can be done to de-escalate this crisis? Joining me to answer these questions and many more is Zaynab Hoosen, Africa analyst at Pangea-Risk in Cape Town, South Africa. We kick off discussing the background to this conflict before having a wider conversation about its current dangerous trajectory. We recorded this conversation live via Substack. I've been enjoying doing these live interviews on the Substack video platform. If you'd like to join us live sometime, please download the Substack app and, of course, subscribe to globaldispatches.org. Thank you. Now here is my conversation with Zaynab Hoosen of Pangea-Risk from Cape Town, South Africa. So Zaynab, let's start by introducing ourselves. My name is Mark Leon Goldberg. I am the editor-in-chief of Global Dispatches, the host of the Global Dispatches podcast. I run Global Dispatches on Substack, and this, of course, is being recorded live on Substack.
My name is Zaynab Hoosen. I'm an Africa analyst at a company called Pangea-Risk, and I am based in Cape Town. So I mainly cover economic, political, and security developments across sub-Saharan Africa, with a specific focus on East and Southern Africa.
And today we are going to be speaking of all of those things that are within your realm of expertise. So, Zaynab, over the last week or so, a rebel group backed by Rwanda, known as M23, has captured the major city in eastern Congo of Goma. This is a major hub of about 2 million people. The M23 group has subsequently pledged to go all the way to Kinshasa, the capital of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and topple the government there. So before we get into these latest developments, can I have you just explain to listeners, to viewers, who are the M23?
So the M23 is a rebel group that is based in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo, the DRC, and the group's longer name is the March 23 movement. So the M23 is a largely ethnic Tutsi group, and they, as you mentioned, have the backing of Rwanda, or should I say the alleged backing of Rwanda, as Rwanda continues to deny its involvement in the rebellion.
But I should just say, it's like well documented at this point that Rwanda is fomenting this group, is supporting this group. And they're actual like Rwandan troops now in Eastern DRC. So it's worth, I think, dispelling Rwanda's denial of the fact that it supports this group.
Yes, and what we've seen over the past week as events have escalated in Goma and in North Kivu as a whole, we've actually seen the international community take a more bold stance on its accusations towards Rwanda, and they have been more blatant than what we have seen over the past couple of years. So, coming back to the M23 itself, in terms of its domestic demands, it is a group that has been lobbying for the integration of its forces into the Congolese army. This is something that was agreed upon over a decade ago with the previous Congolese government, but it was not fulfilled as it was initially pledged in the peace agreement. Now, what the M23 have been doing is that they have been using this clause as a means to continuously launch attacks in North Kivu and continuously advance their military interests. And what Rwanda has been able to do is Rwanda has been able to also join in on this. And it provides the group with financial, military, and logistic support. And of course, with Rwanda's proximity to North Kivu and its proximity to Goma as well, this has allowed Rwanda to send troops over the border as reinforcement for the M23 and also contributed to the escalation and the violence that we have recently seen.
So, what do you suspect the true strategic aims are of both Rwanda and the M23 right now? The area that is under the control of the M23 is mineral rich, and it's rich in the very types of minerals that are most highly in demand in the world today. Those minerals that fuel our smartphones, the energy transition that are helpful in batteries for electric cars. All of the kinds of minerals that are in highest demand today are really located, or many of them are located in this part of the world. Is it reasonable to assume that Rwanda is backing this group as simply a way to expand its own wealth and control access to these mines?
Yes, and I would say that this isn't something that is unique to this time. Now, the Congo, and specifically the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, has a long history of being looted by rebel groups and also foreign forces. Now, we must remember that the Congo experienced two wars in recent decades, the first Congo War and the second Congo War. And both of these saw the involvement of both rebel groups and foreign intervention. And with this foreign intervention came the looting of these minerals. So there are a number of smuggling routes that rebels and regional peers are able to exploit, specifically for critical minerals that are in demand. And I will particularly mention the three TGs. So that's tungsten and tantalum and gold. So those are really important inputs in all electronic devices. So not only the technology that is important for the green energy transition, but for electronics as a whole. So with our world becoming more digitized and more reliant on technology, the demand for these minerals will only grow. And these foreign entities, like Rwanda and others, have essentially seen an opportunity to expand their footprint in this area, which would then allow rebel groups to continue to supply them with the minerals that are then exported and used in our technologies. Now, for us in the rest of the world, because of the precarious situation that these minerals are mined in, it's difficult to trace exactly where they come from. So it's difficult to say whether they actually come from Rwanda or Uganda or whether they've actually been smuggled out of the Eastern DRC. And this is the way that it has been for several decades.
Yeah, I remember reading a UN report a few years ago on the issues that you just described. And the report identified Rwanda as a major global exporter of coltan. But there's no coltan in Rwanda. It's all over the border in the Eastern DRC, suggesting again that somehow they're smuggling or capturing these mines And Rwanda is exploiting the insecurity and instability across its border in order to take the minerals and sell them for its own profit.
What I've also come across recently is that there are reports that suggest that it's actually Rwandan private companies that are also involved in this mix. It's purposely made difficult with several layers. So it's hard for us to actually identify and say explicitly it is the Rwandan government, for example, because it may not be the Rwandan government itself, but all the entities under it is what actually enables this looting machine that we are seeing in the Congo.
So the situation, as you've just described it, was essentially like the status quo for many, many years. Yet in recent weeks, we've seen this really sharp escalation of conflict and of violence in the Eastern DRC with that M23 advance and seizure of Goma, again, a major city in the region, and the M23's attempts to expand elsewhere in the Eastern DRC. Why now do you suspect that we are seeing this major escalation?
Apart from the past couple of years of the M23 seizing territories across North Kivu, as you mentioned, this was kind of the status quo. So since late 2021, the group researched and they captured some territories. But now, in recent weeks, we've seen the group actually close in on Goma and capture strategic mining towns. Now, that falls under the point that we were making earlier about mineral exploitation in this area. But if we zoom out and we take into account what's happening globally, so the US had an election in November.
We
And
did?
and during the time of the M23's more aggressive offensive in the region, the US was going through a transition and quite a peculiar one, I will say. So much of the world's attention was going more towards what is going to happen in the US, and the US was itself was under a transition. What I think happened was that Rwanda and the M23 realized that there is perhaps a gap or there's a window of opportunity to act in North Kivu with limited international scrutiny. Because, yes, there are statements, and yes, there are diplomatic efforts to bring peace and to bring mediation, but there is still the sense of that the rest of the world is distracted. I think this was quite calculated from Rwanda. But then also, if we take into account the actual climate in the Eastern DRC right now, it is the dry season. So the Eastern DRC is quite a dense rainforest. So during the dry season, it is a lot more easier to navigate the forest and navigate the area as they need to in order to expand. So it was merely just an overlap of these factors that made it an opening window for the M23 to capture Goma.
So we are speaking on February 5th. I just had to consult my calendar. It's February 5th right now. Can you just walk us through the events of the last week or so and where things stand right now as we're speaking?
After the capture of Goma on the 26th of January, we then saw the M23 group march southwards towards Bukavu. So Bukavu is the regional capital of South Kivu province, which is the neighboring province of North Kivu. The M23 stated the intent to expand southwards and then westwards towards Kinshasa. So now, as they were marching southwards, there was some pushback from the Congolese army and the Burundian army, which is already stationed in South Kivu for its own national interests, and they managed to push the M23 back. So then, after that happened, on the 3rd of February, the M23 then declared a unilateral ceasefire. So they said that this ceasefire was for humanitarian purposes, but it is more likely an opportunity to regroup after a bit of a setback in their southward mission. And now what they've done is they've now retreated, but they are still holding their positions in North Kivu. So this includes Goma, this includes Sake, this includes also Minova in South Kivu, It includes Rupaya, which are all major mining towns. And also, as you mentioned, Goma is a trade hub. So Goma is basically the entry point of the DRC from the eastern side. So they're controlling everything around there right now.
Correct me if I'm wrong, and you might need to give just a brief geography lesson. So, as you described, the M23, the Rwanda-backed rebel group, is in control of most of North Kivu, which is where Goma, that major hub, is. It's seeking to expand its control to South Kivu, where there's a major city of Bukavu. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but if they are able to capture both North Kivu and South Kivu, that would essentially be Rwanda's border with the DRC. And to me, this strikes such a profound resemblance to what Russia did in Ukraine before the full-scale invasion, which was to just basically capture parts of eastern Ukraine along Russia's border in a transparent attempt at territorial expansion. And then, of course, years later, tried to topple the government of Ukraine. Seems to be kind of what's happening here.
Yes, and it comes as no surprise that Rwanda has a history of looting those minerals that actually lie along the border. So it might not be that Rwanda intends to physically expand its borders the way that Russia intends to, but Rwanda does want to gain more control of that area. Because we must remember the borders in Africa are really porous. It's difficult to really tell where the line is drawn. So it's not perhaps necessary to have an explicit expansion of Rwanda, but that doesn't mean Rwanda can't control those areas without that territorial expansion because of how the region it's been embedded in conflict for so long that the Congolese government doesn't really have control of the area anyway. So it might not even be necessary to physically move its border westwards into the Congo, because it can still do that with the area technically being Congo, but Rwanda is able to continue to loot as it has been.
Yeah, it doesn't need to annex the Eastern DRC in order to exploit its wealth. So, as you noted, the situation as it stands now is a unilateral ceasefire was declared by the M23, but everyone I've talked to, including you, just presume this to be an opportunity for the M23 to regroup after a battlefield setback. So that is where things stand now. The situation is just extremely volatile throughout the DRC. As we mentioned earlier, the M23 has threatened to march on Kinshasa and topple the government of the DRC. What opportunities do you see exist today to reduce the violence and to potentially stop this group from cementing control over Eastern DRC?
Apart from the regional summit that will take place in Tanzania on Friday, this will be a joint summit between the East African Community, the EAC, and the Southern African Development Community, SADC. So apart from the regional efforts, what I really think would push Rwanda to calm its support for the M23 and the M23's offensive is Western international calls for a genuine ceasefire and for a genuine withdrawal from North Kivu. At the moment, as it stands, I think that there's limited scope for a full drawdown of Rwandan troops from the Eastern DRC, and this is mainly also because Uganda has troops stationed there, and so does Burundi, as I mentioned earlier. And all of these countries, they have their own tensions towards each other, and it's a climate of distrust. So I am in doubt that Rwanda will be willing to quickly withdraw, but I do think that international pressure is what will eventually result in the M23 withdrawing from Goma. The M23 has actually captured Goma before. And the last time, what actually got the M23 to withdraw was calls from the international community. And given Kagame, the president of Rwanda's dominant military position in the region, it is unlikely that any of these regional peers will convince him to do anything other than what he wants to do.
So really, you are saying it is Western pressure that on Rwanda that will make the difference in this situation. But I just have to wonder who will lead this kind of Western pressure campaign. I mean, earlier you said that one of the reasons that this conflict erupted when it did was because Rwanda and the M23 noted that there was a profound lack of international attention to this crisis because of our own political calamities happening here in the United States. And under normal circumstances, this would be a situation in which the United States leads on the Western powers to confront Rwanda. The United States and Rwanda have deep ties. A lot of Western countries in Rwanda have deep ties. Rwanda has been a recipient of a lot of American foreign aid over the years and has friendly relations with the US government, or at least it did have. But now we have this really kind of unprecedented withdrawal by the United States from any sort of like pretension that it's like an international leader on these sorts of things. So, like, where does that leave this situation?
I think if it can't be the US right now, given the position that the US has taken on international diplomacy in general, I would say it would be France and the UK. Rwanda has quite close ties with both of these countries at the moment. And I do believe that they are in a stronger position to put pressure on Rwanda. But the political will needs to be there in order to do this. And given that Rwanda is considered to be a stable power in the Great Lakes region where it is embedded in turmoil, these governments often have to weigh out their options. And then we also know that Rwanda is fighting insurgents in Mozambique. And the French company Total Energies is actually relying on Rwanda in this region. So then it puts the French government in a difficult position with, can it reprimand what Rwanda is doing in the eastern DRC, but then still continue to rely on it to fight insurgent groups in northern Mozambique? It's uncertain where it is going, but I do think still that that is the only way, because also if we think of other major regional players, like for example South Africa isn't really in a position to put pressure on Rwanda right now. And we also saw that South Africa, along with other international troops that were stationed in North Kivu, they actually were overrun quite easily for the M23 to capture Goma.
And a number of South African troops were killed, correct?
Yes, 14 of them, likely more. We don't know. We'll have to see, because it's like each day the death toll in Goma and the surrounding areas actually goes up. So we aren't in a position to threaten Rwanda or the M23 militarily. How easy it captured Goma just demonstrates that. So it's unfortunately can't be us. It will have to be a bigger global power. But as I mentioned, there needs to be political will for it. And there needs to be a sense that these Western governments will take a more humanitarian stance rather than a trying to protect their own interests when it comes to access to critical minerals.
So we are speaking again on February 5th. In the coming days or weeks, are there any events on the ground or international moments or inflection points that will suggest to you the trajectory of this crisis?
What I think could basically indicate that the conflict is going to escalate more would be more troops coming over from Uganda and more, let's say, covert regional intervention, and then also more troops from Burundi, because this would then spell another full-blown regional conflict on Congolese soil. That is the downside scenario that I see happening. And we did see that there are early reports that Uganda has actually sent 1,000 more troops close to where the M23 is stationed. This could spell an escalation. But also, an upside scenario perhaps would be that if there is some kind of agreement at the joint summit in Tanzania on Friday, the 7th of February, if there's an agreement with regards to the cessation of hostilities and also an agreement on the Congolese government's part to negotiate with the M23 and hold dialogue, then we might see a more simmering down of the current violence in North Kivu.
Can you just very briefly describe Uganda's interest here? Why might Ugandan troops be sent over the border?
So, Uganda has been involved in a joint military operation with the Congolese army since 2021, since around the same time that the M23 resurged. So, Uganda and Rwanda have both fought against the DRC in previous conflicts. So they both have a history of being involved in both wars, in the first Congo War and the second Congo War. But they also have quite a volatile relationship. This is Uganda and Rwanda. So they go through phases where they are allied, but then they'll accuse each other of spying, of espionage, and it's most likely because they both are involved in minerals extraction in the eastern DRC. So much of the tensions is overtly explained as diplomatic kind of tensions, but it's due to their involvement and their competition for minerals in the eastern DRC and also for control and power in that area. Recently, what we've seen is that they have enjoyed a good relationship with the Congolese government, but Rwanda is not the same, and this has contributed to mistrust between these two governments.
So we have a couple of questions from the audience. I'll take one from Monty McMurtry. I'll slightly rephrase it, though. What impact on the conflict dynamics in the Eastern DRC do you see stemming from the U.S. foreign aid freeze and the dissolution, decapitation of USAID? Will that have any impact on the Eastern DRC?
It will have an impact in terms of the humanitarian response. Thousands of people have been displaced just in the past 2 weeks since the M23 seized Goma. So this is an area where civilians rely on internally displaced camps for refuge. And with the aid cuts, this will limit humanitarian organizations' ability to effectively respond to the humanitarian disaster that comes out of the violence.
And finally, a question from Maya Plentz, who writes the UN Brief Substack, which everyone should subscribe to. What American companies operate in the region?
I'm not entirely sure about which American companies specifically operate in the Eastern DRC, but we did see last year that the Congolese government accused the subsidiaries of Apple in France and Belgium of using conflict minerals. And the criminal case specifically referred to the 3TGs that we were talking about earlier. So, as I mentioned before, the mining in this area takes place under really difficult to trace conditions. So, it might not be that the companies explicitly know where they are getting the minerals from is from a conflict zone because it's so difficult to trace. So, in a short answer, I can't explicitly say which companies, but there are global companies whose supply chains are accused of being involved in the conflict indirectly.
Well, Zaynab, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you, as always, for speaking with me. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me back on the show, Mark. It's always a pleasure to talk.
And for those of you watching the live stream, if you like this kind of format, please let me know, and we could do more of these. And I have one scheduled tomorrow with Yaroslav Trofimov, the Wall Street Journal's national security reporter, who's Ukrainian, who's in Ukraine, to discuss what's happening in Ukraine today and the impact of the American election on the conflict in Ukraine and the politics of Ukraine. So stay tuned for that tomorrow. And again, if you like this, if you're watching the live stream, please consider getting a monthly paid subscription to Global Dispatches so I can keep doing this. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Global Dispatches. The show is produced by me, Mark Leon Goldberg. It is edited and mixed by Levi Sharp. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to follow the show and enable automatic downloads to get new episodes as soon as they're released. On Spotify, tap the bell icon to get a notification when we publish new episodes. And of course, please visit globaldispatches.org to get on our free mailing list, get in touch with me, and access our full archive. Thank you.